She had always loved music. Even when life felt heavy and unfair, the soft hum of a melody could make her heart lighter. She spent hours listening to old records, tracing the keys on the piano at the community center, and dreaming of a day when she could play with the kind of depth that could touch people's souls. Her life, however, was far from easy. Days were long, and she worked multiple jobs just to keep herself afloat. The world seemed to demand more than she could give, yet she held on to her music as if it were the only thread keeping her from being lost. One morning, a letter arrived at her small apartment. She almost didn't open it, thinking it would be another bill or rejection. But inside, the words made her heart skip a beat. A renowned music foundation had chosen her for a special opportunity. They were giving her a piano, but it wasn't just any piano. They called it Unthinkable. The letter explained that it was a rare instrument, known for its unusual design and unpredictability. Many had tried to play it and failed. Some said it could not be tamed. Others said it was more of an art piece than a musical instrument. And now it was hers. Her hands trembled as she read the letter again. She felt a mixture of excitement and fear. The word unthinkable echoed in her mind. Could she really make it sing? Could she be the one to turn something so difficult into beauty? Doubt crept in, whispering that she was not ready, that she was not skilled enough. She put the letter down and sat silently, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The thought of this impossible piano filled her with both hope and anxiety. The next day, the piano arrived. It was larger than she expected, its frame ornate and delicate, with curves and edges that seemed almost alive. The keys looked uneven, as if they were not quite in line, and the pedals had a strange shape that made her hesitate. She ran her hands over it, feeling the cold, smooth wood, and wondered if she had made a mistake. How could anyone play this piano? She could almost hear the whispers of those who had failed before her. And yet, there was something inviting about it, something that called to her stubborn heart. She sat down on the bench for the first time and pressed a key. The sound that came out was not what she expected. It was sharp and awkward, jarring in a way that made her wince. She tried another note, then a chord, but each attempt seemed to resist her. She frowned, frustration building in her chest. This piano was alive in a way she had never experienced. It refused to be controlled by ordinary hands. She pulled back, almost tempted to give up, but the curiosity in her would not allow it. Days passed, and she returned to the piano whenever she could. At first, her sessions were brief, filled with missteps and awkward sounds. She made notes, took mental snapshots of how each key felt, and slowly began to understand that this piano demanded patience and observation more than skill alone. She discovered that certain keys only sounded right when pressed lightly, while others required a stronger touch. The pedals could produce unexpected echoes if used in the correct sequence. The piano, in its strange way, was teaching her its secrets, but only if she was willing to listen. Her friends and neighbors noticed her obsession. They asked why she spent so much time on something that seemed impossible. She could only smile and shake her head. The piano had become more than an instrument. It had become a challenge, a puzzle that called to her deeper self. Some nights, she would sit in front of it long after the sun had set, her fingers tracing patterns across the keys, feeling the vibrations under her hands. She began to record these moments, trying to capture the sounds that emerged, fragments of music that were rough but full of potential. There were times when the frustration overwhelmed her. Notes that should have been simple melodies sounded like a mess of random sounds. Chords clashed, rhythms stumbled, and she felt as if the piano mocked her efforts. Tears came more than once, and she questioned her own abilities. Why had she been given this unthinkable challenge? Was she foolish to think she could succeed? Yet, each time she felt ready to give up, a soft, hidden note would emerge from the piano. A sound that was pure, clear, and beautiful. It was as if the piano was offering her a glimpse of what could be, a promise that her persistence might be rewarded. Slowly, she began to see patterns. She learned which keys could be combined to create harmony, and which sequences produced interesting rhythms. She experimented with dynamics, soft touches, and sudden accents. She discovered that patience was the true key. Rushing the piano only produced chaos. She began to think of herself not as someone trying to master the piano, but as someone collaborating with it. The instrument was no longer her opponent but her partner. And in those moments, something magical began to happen. The piano, once impossible, began to respond. It hummed under her fingers, resonated with emotion, and whispered possibilities she had never imagined. Her confidence grew, but she remained humble. She knew there was still a long way to go. She also realized that this journey was teaching her more than music. It was teaching her resilience, creativity, and the power of persistence. Every day brought small victories, an unexpected chord that worked, a melody that flowed, a rhythm that felt alive. These moments were tiny sparks, but together they built a fire inside her that would not be extinguished. One afternoon, after weeks of practice, she played a sequence that surprised even herself. The notes rang out clearly, and the strange piano seemed to sing. She paused, letting the sound linger in the room, and felt a deep sense of accomplishment. For the first time, she felt that the word unthinkable could be transformed into something real and beautiful. She smiled, knowing that this was only the beginning. The piano still had mysteries to reveal, challenges to present, and music to create. But she no longer feared it. She had found the courage to face the impossible. Word began to spread in her small community about the young woman and her unthinkable piano. Some came to listen, curious to hear the strange instrument played. Others brought advice or encouragement, and she welcomed their support but kept her focus on the piano itself. Each note she played became a conversation between her and the instrument, a dialogue that spoke of patience, determination, and hope. She realized that this piano was more than a challenge. It was a gift. It forced her to confront doubt, embrace uncertainty, and discover creativity in places she had never looked before. She learned to trust herself, to trust her instincts, and to trust the music that flowed through her fingers. And as she sat there, day after day, listening to the soft hum of possibility, she knew that she was ready for whatever came next. She had faced the unthinkable, and she was beginning to make it sing. She returned to the piano the next morning with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The previous weeks had been a dance of small discoveries, small victories, and many failures. She knew the instrument was unlike any other she had ever touched. Its keys were unpredictable, its tones stubborn, and yet there was something about it that whispered possibilities, urging her to keep going. She sat down, her fingers hovering above the keys, unsure which notes to strike first. Every sound seemed to demand attention, every key a decision that could either lead to harmony or chaos. She began slowly, pressing a few keys in sequence, trying to listen to how the notes responded. Some notes rang clearly, smooth and true, while others crackled, almost resisting her touch. It was a strange mix of frustration and fascination. She tried different combinations, changing her approach with each attempt, discovering that the piano responded differently depending on timing, pressure, and even the way her hands moved. She realized that this piano required her full attention and patience. She could no longer play mechanically, following what she had learned on other instruments. This piano needed her to think, feel, and adapt constantly. Days turned into weeks. Each day, she sat for hours, exploring, experimenting, and sometimes simply listening. She started to notice patterns emerging, subtle cues that told her which keys could be combined, how certain chords could resonate together, and how the pedals could alter the sound in unexpected ways. It was like learning a new language, a language that demanded creativity, focus, and intuition. She often stopped to write down her observations, sketching out notes and patterns, building her understanding piece by piece. Her first major breakthrough came one rainy afternoon. The room was quiet, the sound of water pattering against the window a soft accompaniment to her practice. She pressed a sequence of keys almost instinctively, trying a rhythm she hadn't thought of before. The sound that emerged was unlike anything she had played, a melody that felt alive, with movement and depth. She paused, her breath caught in her chest. It was not perfect, but it was beautiful. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine the music spreading beyond her apartment, reaching the ears of people who would be moved by it. The piano, which had seemed impossible, had finally given her a glimpse of its soul. Encouraged by this small success, she dove deeper. She experimented with tempo, trying slower rhythms that let the notes linger, then faster sequences that made the piano almost dance. She discovered that the instrument responded to her mood, her intention, and even her energy. When she was anxious, the notes could sound sharp and harsh. When she was calm and focused, the music flowed effortlessly. She realized that mastering the piano was as much about understanding herself as it was about understanding the instrument. Not every session was filled with such success. There were days when the notes refused to cooperate, when her hands fumbled, and the sounds that came out were nothing like what she imagined. Frustration would rise like a storm inside her, and sometimes she wanted to give up, to walk away and forget the unthinkable piano ever existed. But even on those days, she could not ignore the tiny sparks of music that broke through the chaos, moments that reminded her of the piano's potential. She began to accept that failure was part of the process, that each mistake was a step toward understanding, and that perseverance was the key to progress. She also began to experiment with improvisation. Instead of playing structured pieces, she allowed herself to move freely across the keys, letting her emotions guide her. The piano responded in unexpected ways, producing sounds that were sometimes beautiful, sometimes strange, but always alive. These sessions taught her to trust her instincts, to let go of control, and to listen deeply. She realized that the piano had its own voice, and that her role was to coax it out, to discover the stories hidden within its complex design. As her confidence grew, she began recording her practice sessions. Listening back, she could hear the progress she was making, the subtle shifts in tone, the moments where the piano seemed to sing with clarity. Each recording was a lesson, revealing what worked and what did not. She learned to adjust her touch, refine her timing, and experiment with dynamics. The more she listened, the more she understood the piano's personality, and the closer she came to creating music that felt alive. Word of her dedication spread slowly. A neighbor who had seen her playing shared the news with a few others, and soon, a small group began to gather outside her apartment, curious to hear the unthinkable piano in action. She welcomed them, though she was careful to maintain her focus. Their presence was encouraging, but it also reminded her of the responsibility she carried. This piano was not just an instrument. It was a challenge, a test of creativity, patience, and resilience. One evening, she discovered a hidden quality of the piano. By pressing a combination of keys and pedals in a precise way, she could create a resonance that lingered long after the notes had been struck. It was an echo, a shadow of sound that gave her music depth and complexity. This discovery opened a new world of possibilities. She spent hours exploring it, experimenting with layering melodies, and creating textures that seemed to float in the air. For the first time, she felt a deep connection to the piano, as if it were a living being sharing its secrets with her. Her days became a rhythm of work, exploration, and music. She learned to balance patience with experimentation, control with freedom. Each session was a journey, a chance to discover something new, to unlock another secret hidden within the unthinkable piano. She realized that this was not a task to be completed quickly. It was a lifelong adventure, one that required dedication, humility, and passion. There were moments of doubt, of course. She questioned whether she was truly capable of making the piano sing in a way that would touch others. She compared herself to great musicians she had admired, wondering if she could ever reach such heights. But she also knew that this piano was unique, and that her journey was her own. Success would not be measured by comparison, but by the connection she could create between herself, the instrument, and those who listened. Slowly, she began to imagine performing for others, not just friends or neighbors, but a wider audience. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She knew she needed more practice, more understanding, more confidence. But the seed had been planted. She began to dream of a day when the piano's voice would be heard beyond the walls of her apartment, when the unthinkable could be transformed into something extraordinary. By the end of the second month, she could play short pieces that were coherent and expressive. The piano still had quirks, still resisted her at times, but she had learned to work with it, to listen and to respond. Each success, no matter how small, built her confidence and strengthened her resolve. She felt herself changing, becoming more patient, more focused, and more attuned to the subtle nuances of music and life. Through this journey, she discovered something profound. The piano was not just a challenge to be overcome, but a mirror of her own growth. The struggle, the frustration, the breakthroughs, they reflected her perseverance, her creativity, and her willingness to face the unknown. She began to see the unthinkable piano not as an impossible task, but as a companion, a teacher, and a source of endless inspiration. And so, she continued, day after day, note by note, chord by chord, exploring the depths of the piano's personality, learning to coax its voice, and discovering the beauty hidden within its complex and unyielding form. The journey was far from over, but she had taken the first true steps, turning frustration into curiosity, doubt into determination, and the impossible into a melody that could, perhaps one day, sing. She had been working with the unthinkable piano for months now, and the strange instrument had become both a challenge and a companion. Every morning, she approached it with a mixture of hope and curiosity. The piano still resisted at times, producing unexpected sounds that tested her patience, but she had learned to read its responses. She could feel the subtle differences in touch and pressure, and she began to understand the personality hidden within its keys. One afternoon, while experimenting with a series of chords she had been practicing for weeks, something remarkable happened. She pressed the keys in a sequence almost by instinct, and the piano responded in a way she had never heard before. The notes flowed seamlessly into one another, creating a melody that was full of depth and emotion. She stopped playing for a moment, letting the sound linger in the room. It was as if the piano had recognized her determination and chosen to share its hidden voice. Her heart raced with excitement, and tears filled her eyes. She had discovered a breakthrough, a way to make the unthinkable sing. This discovery changed the way she approached the piano. She realized that the instrument had its own language, one that could not be forced but needed to be understood. She spent hours repeating the sequence, experimenting with variations, and learning how different dynamics and tempos could alter the sound. Each attempt revealed new possibilities, and she began to see the piano as a partner rather than a challenge. The keys were no longer obstacles. They were tools for expression, capable of conveying emotion in ways she had never imagined. Her breakthrough gave her confidence, but she knew there was still much to learn. She began to explore improvisation more seriously, allowing her emotions to guide her hands across the keys. The piano responded to her mood, producing sounds that were sometimes soft and gentle, other times bold and powerful. She discovered that the instrument could express nuances that no other piano could, and she felt a deep connection to it. Each note she played was a conversation, a dialogue between her and the unthinkable piano. Encouraged by her progress, she started to compose short pieces. She combined the sequences she had discovered with new ideas, experimenting with rhythm, harmony, and melody. The piano seemed to respond intuitively, offering sounds that inspired her creativity. She wrote down her compositions, carefully noting the keys, chords, and techniques that worked best. Her room was filled with sheets of music, each representing a step in her journey of discovery. She also began to share her progress with a few close friends and neighbors. They were amazed by the music that came from the strange piano, often commenting on how the melodies felt alive and full of emotion. Their encouragement fueled her determination, but she remained focused on understanding the instrument rather than seeking validation. She knew that the piano had much more to teach her, and she was eager to learn. One evening, she decided to experiment with the piano's unique resonance. She had noticed that certain combinations of keys and pedals created echoes that lingered longer than expected. By carefully timing her movements, she could layer these echoes to produce a rich, textured sound. She spent hours exploring this technique, discovering that it could add depth and complexity to her compositions. The piano was revealing its secrets, and she was learning to listen closely enough to hear them. As she explored these new possibilities, she began to notice how her own emotions influenced the music. When she felt joy, the piano seemed to sing brightly, producing melodies that lifted her spirits. When she felt sadness, the notes were softer, more introspective, reflecting the weight of her feelings. She realized that the unthinkable piano was not just a mechanical instrument. It was a mirror of her own emotional landscape. Playing it required not only technical skill but also self-awareness and honesty. Her practice sessions became more structured as she sought to refine her technique. She set goals for each day, focusing on specific sequences, rhythms, and dynamics. She recorded her sessions and listened back carefully, analyzing what worked and what needed improvement. Over time, she noticed a significant improvement in her ability to control the piano and coax it into producing the sounds she imagined. Each day brought new discoveries, and her confidence grew alongside her skill. Despite the progress, there were still moments of frustration. Some sequences that had worked perfectly before would suddenly sound off, as if the piano were reminding her that it could not be fully tamed. She learned to approach these moments with patience, understanding that the instrument had its own rhythm and will. She adapted her playing, adjusting her touch and timing, and often found that the unexpected sounds led to new creative ideas. The piano was teaching her flexibility and resilience, lessons that extended beyond music. As the months passed, she began to feel a sense of accomplishment. The piano, once unthinkable, had become a source of endless inspiration. She could play short compositions with clarity and expression, and the melodies she created felt alive. She continued to experiment with improvisation, layering, and resonance, constantly discovering new possibilities. The instrument had become an extension of her creativity, a partner in the act of creation rather than a challenge to overcome. She also started to imagine sharing her music more broadly. The thought of performing for an audience both excited and terrified her. She wondered if people outside her small circle could appreciate the unique qualities of the piano and the music it could produce. The idea of sharing her journey, of showing that the impossible could be transformed into beauty, became a motivating force. She knew that she had to be patient and continue refining her skills, but the dream of performing for others gave her practice a new sense of purpose. Her breakthrough also taught her about the importance of listening. She realized that playing the piano was not just about striking keys in the right order. It was about understanding the subtle nuances of sound, rhythm, and resonance. She began to listen more carefully to other music, analyzing how different instruments interacted and how musicians conveyed emotion through their playing. This broader understanding enriched her own practice and inspired new ideas for compositions. In addition to her musical growth, she noticed changes within herself. She felt more confident, patient, and focused. The process of working with the unthinkable piano had strengthened her resolve and deepened her understanding of creativity. She learned to embrace challenges, to persist through frustration, and to find beauty in unexpected places. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a teacher, guiding her toward personal growth and artistic expression. By the end of this period, she had developed a series of short compositions that showcased the unique qualities of the piano. Each piece was a reflection of her journey, capturing moments of struggle, discovery, and triumph. She felt a deep sense of pride in her progress, knowing that she had turned an unthinkable challenge into an opportunity for expression and creativity. The piano, once resistant and unpredictable, had become a source of inspiration and joy. As she sat at the piano one evening, playing a piece she had composed that day, she felt a profound connection to the instrument. The notes flowed effortlessly, each one resonating with emotion and meaning. She understood that her journey was far from over, but she had taken a significant step forward. The unthinkable piano had revealed its voice, and she had learned to listen, adapt, and create. The breakthrough she had experienced was not just a musical achievement. It was a moment of transformation, a realization that persistence, curiosity, and patience could turn even the most impossible challenges into something beautiful. Months of practice, frustration, and discovery had shaped her in ways she never expected. The unthinkable piano had become more than an instrument. It had become a friend, a challenge, and a teacher. She had learned patience, persistence, and the power of listening deeply. Her fingers moved across the keys with confidence now, coaxing melodies that were full of emotion, and she felt ready for a new step. She wanted the world to hear the music she had nurtured, to share the voice of a piano that had once seemed impossible to play. The idea of performing publicly both thrilled and scared her. She thought of small gatherings at first, perhaps inviting friends and neighbors. She imagined their reactions, some curious, some skeptical, and others amazed. Her heart raced at the thought of playing for others, of exposing her work and her emotions to people she did not know. The piano had been her private world for so long, a place where mistakes were hidden and breakthroughs celebrated in solitude. Sharing it felt like stepping into a new world. She decided to start small. One evening, she invited a few neighbors to her apartment. The room was modest, but the atmosphere was warm and filled with anticipation. People gathered, some sitting quietly, others leaning in to see the piano she had spoken about for months. She took a deep breath, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, and began to play. The first notes were soft, cautious, as if testing the waters. Then the music began to flow, a melody that rose and fell, full of emotion and life. The audience was silent at first, listening intently to the sounds that emerged from the piano. There was an astonishment in their eyes, a recognition that this was something different, something extraordinary. The melodies were not just notes strung together. They told a story, captured feelings, and created a world that seemed larger than the room itself. She felt their attention, their presence, but she did not falter. The piano, once unthinkable, had become an extension of her voice. As she continued to play, she allowed herself to improvise. Her emotions guided her hands, and the piano responded in kind, producing sounds that were rich, layered, and unexpected. She could feel the connection between herself, the instrument, and the audience. Each note seemed to bridge the gap, conveying feelings that words could not express. By the end of the performance, there was a moment of silence, a collective breath, before the room erupted in quiet applause. She felt a rush of joy, relief, and pride. The piano had spoken, and the world had listened. Encouraged by this success, she began to perform for larger groups. Friends recommended her to local music clubs and small venues. Each performance was a learning experience, a chance to understand how the piano's unique qualities resonated with different people. Some audiences were skeptical at first, unsure how to react to an instrument that defied expectations. Others were moved to tears, their emotions stirred by the melodies that seemed to carry both struggle and triumph. She began to see that the piano had the power to touch hearts, to inspire, and to connect people through music. With each performance, her confidence grew. She learned to prepare without rigidly controlling every note, allowing space for spontaneity and improvisation. She discovered that audiences responded not just to technical skill, but to the honesty and emotion behind the music. The piano, with its quirks and challenges, had taught her to embrace imperfection, to find beauty in unexpected moments, and to trust her instincts. Each audience became a partner in the music, sharing in the dialogue between her and the unthinkable instrument. She also began to experiment with combining her compositions into longer, cohesive performances. She wove short pieces together, creating narratives through music that told stories of struggle, discovery, and triumph. The piano's unique voice added depth and character to each performance, making every show distinct and memorable. She felt a sense of fulfillment as she saw how her music could evoke emotion, spark imagination, and leave a lasting impression on those who listened. Word of her talent began to spread. Local newspapers and online platforms took notice, sharing stories of the young woman who had tamed the unthinkable piano. She received invitations to perform at community events, small concerts, and charity gatherings. Each opportunity was exciting and nerve-wracking, but but she embraced them with the same curiosity and determination that had guided her through months of practice. The piano had become not just a personal achievement, but a bridge to connect with a larger world. Through these experiences, she learned to balance preparation with improvisation. She practiced diligently, refining her technique and exploring new musical ideas. At the same time, she allowed room for spontaneity, trusting the piano and herself to respond naturally in the moment. This balance became the essence of her performances, creating music that felt alive, authentic, and deeply moving. Her connection with the audience grew stronger with each performance. She began to notice the small reactions, the quiet nods, the smiles, the moments when listeners closed their eyes and let the music wash over them. These reactions inspired her to keep pushing boundaries, to explore new sounds, and to find new ways to express herself through the piano. She realized that the unthinkable instrument was more than a challenge. It was a gift, capable of creating beauty that reached beyond the confines of her room. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, she was approached by a young musician who had attended the show. He asked questions about the piano, about her approach, and about how she had overcome the challenges it presented. She shared her experiences, emphasizing patience, listening, and the willingness to experiment. Seeing someone else inspired by her journey filled her with a sense of purpose. She understood that her music could inspire others, not just entertain them, and that the unthinkable piano had the power to spark creativity in more ways than one. She continued to explore new compositions, blending traditional techniques with improvisation and experimentation. She discovered that the piano's unique characteristics could be used to create textures and harmonies that were impossible on other instruments. Each new piece was an adventure, a journey into sound that challenged her creativity and rewarded her persistence. She felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that she was constantly learning, growing, and evolving as a musician. Performing publicly also taught her valuable lessons about resilience and courage. There were times when a performance did not go as planned, when mistakes happened or the piano responded unpredictably. She learned to handle these moments with grace, using them as opportunities to adapt and explore new directions in her music. The unthinkable piano had taught her that challenges were not obstacles to be feared, but opportunities to discover new possibilities. Through her performances, she began to see the impact of her music on others. People approached her afterward, sharing how a melody had moved them, how a harmony had brought back memories, or how the piano had inspired them to pursue their own passions. These moments reinforced her belief in the power of music, the importance of perseverance, and the value of embracing challenges. The unthinkable piano had not only transformed her abilities, but it had also allowed her to touch lives in meaningful ways. As her reputation grew, she remained humble, remembering the months of struggle and discovery that had brought her to this point. She continued to practice diligently, exploring new techniques, and seeking new ways to express the unique voice of the piano. She understood that mastery was not a destination, but a journey, and that the unthinkable instrument still held countless secrets waiting to be uncovered. The combination of public performance, personal growth, and creative exploration made her journey with the piano profoundly rewarding. She had transformed an impossible challenge into a source of inspiration, learning to trust herself, the instrument, and the music they created together. Each performance was a testament to patience, perseverance, and the belief that even the unthinkable could be made to sing. As she sat at the piano one evening, preparing for another performance, she reflected on her journey. She thought about the early days of frustration, the moments of doubt, and the breakthroughs that had changed everything. She realized that the unthinkable piano had shaped her not just as a musician, but as a person. It had taught her resilience, creativity, and the importance of embracing challenges. And as she began to play, letting the notes flow into the room, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The piano had finally become a voice not just for her, but for anyone willing to listen, a voice that transformed struggle into beauty and impossibility into song. Her journey with the unthinkable piano had come a long way. From the first day she had touched its stubborn keys to the first time it had responded with music that felt alive. She had grown in ways she never imagined. She had learned patience, resilience, and the beauty of discovery. And now, she was ready to embrace what she had learned and share it on a deeper level. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a bridge between her heart and the world, a voice that could express what words could not. As she prepared for her next performance, she thought about the people who had watched her play over the months. Friends, neighbors, and strangers had listened to her music and found themselves moved in unexpected ways. Some had been skeptical at first, unsure what to expect from a piano that seemed impossible to play. Others had been inspired by the persistence and creativity she displayed. She realized that her journey was not just about mastering the piano. It was about showing others that challenges could be transformed into beauty with effort, patience, and imagination. The day of the performance arrived, and she felt a mix of nerves and excitement. The venue was modest, but the atmosphere was filled with anticipation. People filled the chairs, curious to see the young woman who had tamed the unthinkable piano. As she sat down, she took a deep breath and let her fingers rest lightly on the keys. The room fell silent, and for a moment, she simply listened to the quiet, allowing herself to feel grounded and ready. She began to play, starting with a familiar melody she had composed months ago. The piano responded effortlessly, the notes flowing and blending in a way that felt natural and alive. She gradually introduced new sequences, experimenting with dynamics, tempo, and resonance. The music filled the room, carrying with it the emotions of her journey: frustration, curiosity, discovery, and triumph. The audience was captivated, leaning in, holding their breath, and then letting themselves be carried by the melodies. As she continued, she allowed herself to improvise, following the piano's voice as much as her own. Each note seemed to have a life of its own, creating layers of sound that were rich and textured. She felt a deep connection to the instrument and to the audience, a sense that they were all part of the same conversation. The piano had once seemed impossible, but now it was a partner in creating beauty, a collaborator in expressing her inner world. The performance reached its climax with a piece she had been working on in secret. It was a composition that combined everything she had learned: precise sequences, resonant echoes, and improvisational flourishes that captured the emotional depth of her journey. She played with confidence, letting the music flow naturally, trusting both herself and the piano. The audience was silent, completely absorbed in the sound. Every note resonated, every chord told a story, and every pause held meaning. When the final note faded, the room was still for a heartbeat, and then applause erupted. People cheered, clapped, and some even wiped tears from their eyes. She felt a surge of joy and relief, knowing that the piano had spoken, that her music had touched the hearts of those who listened. She smiled, realizing that this was more than a performance. It was a celebration of persistence, creativity, and the power of embracing challenges. In the days that followed, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the long hours of practice, the frustration, and the moments of discovery. She remembered the times she had doubted herself, wondering if she could ever make the piano sing. And she realized that those moments of struggle had been essential, shaping her skills, her patience, and her understanding. The unthinkable piano had not just taught her about music, it had taught her about herself. She continued to perform, each time refining her technique, exploring new ideas, and connecting with her audience in meaningful ways. She found that the music had the power to inspire, to heal, and to awaken emotions that words could not reach. People came to her not just for entertainment, but for the experience of hearing something that felt alive, personal, and transformative. The piano, once impossible, had become a source of joy, connection, and inspiration. Beyond performance, she also began to teach others. She shared her insights with young musicians who were curious about the piano, emphasizing the importance of patience, listening, and creativity. She encouraged them to explore challenges with an open mind, to embrace mistakes as opportunities for growth, and to discover the unique voice within each instrument. Her guidance was practical, but also deeply personal, drawing on her own experiences and the lessons the piano had taught her. She noticed that her own growth continued as she taught, explaining her methods, reflecting on her choices, and seeing others discover their own creativity reinforced the lessons she had learned. She realized that the journey with the piano was ongoing, that there was always more to explore, more to discover, and more to express. The unthinkable piano was no longer a limit. It was a source of endless possibility. As time passed, her story began to reach beyond her local community. People read about her journey, shared her music, and were inspired by her dedication and creativity. She received invitations to perform at events and gatherings she had never imagined. Each opportunity was exciting, but she approached them with the same curiosity and focus that had guided her from the beginning. She understood that every performance, every new experience, was part of the ongoing conversation with the piano. She continued to compose, experimenting with new sounds, rhythms, and techniques. The piano's unique qualities allowed her to create music that could not be replicated on any other instrument. She explored layering melodies, using resonance and echo, and improvising in ways that felt alive and spontaneous. Her compositions reflected her journey, its challenges, discoveries, emotions, and triumphs. Each piece was a story, and each performance was an invitation for the audience to step into that story with her. Through it all, she remained humble and grateful. She never forgot the early days of struggle, the doubts, and the tiny breakthroughs that had led to this point. She understood that the piano had taught her more than music. It had taught her patience, resilience, and the value of embracing the unknown. She carried these lessons with her in every aspect of her life, and they informed the way she approached challenges, relationships, and opportunities. In quiet moments, she would sit at the piano and reflect on how far she had come. She thought about the unthinkable instrument that had once seemed impossible to play and smiled at how it had transformed her life. She had learned to listen, to adapt, and to trust both herself and the piano. The music they created together was a testament to the power of persistence, creativity, and courage. Her journey was far from over. She knew that the piano still held secrets, that there were melodies yet to be discovered, and stories yet to be told. She approached each day with a sense of curiosity and wonder, ready to explore, to experiment, and to create. The unthinkable piano was no longer a challenge. It was a companion, a source of inspiration, and a voice that could speak for anyone willing to listen. Looking back, she understood that the greatest gift of the piano was not the music alone, but the journey it had taken her on. It had shown her that challenges could be transformed into beauty, that persistence could overcome doubt, and that creativity could flourish even in the most difficult circumstances. She had faced the impossible and had made it sing, not just for herself, but for everyone who heard the music. And so, she continued to play, to perform, and to share her gift. Each note was a reflection of her journey, each melody a story of determination, patience, and discovery. The unthinkable piano had become a symbol of what was possible when one dared to face challenges with courage, curiosity, and heart. Through her music, she inspired others to listen, to dream, and to believe that even the impossible could be transformed into something beautiful and lasting.